This podcast is part of the Deluxe Edition Network. To find other great shows on the network, head over to deluxeeditionnetwork.com. That's deluxeeditionnetwork.com.
The year is 1990, and director Curtis Hanson was still a few years away from his box office smash, The River Wild. But let's not forget his string of low-budget adult-themed thrillers like The Silent Partner, The Bedroom Window, and this film. A thriller in the vein of Patricia Highsmith stories and Alfred Hitchcock films, where a soft-souled yuppie named Michael, played by the ever-charming James Spader, is given a boost of confidence and self-worth from a mysterious stranger named Alex, played by Rob Lowe at the peak of his Brat Pack fame. But Alex is more than he appears as he begins to bring Michael further into the depths of manipulation and despair. The more Michael resists, the more Alex pushes back in this tightly wound thriller called Bad Influence. Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, two titans of cinematic review. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong, but always captivating. Your hosts Antonio of the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and Justin Henson of the Movie Wire are here to take you back to the balcony. All right, brother. So 1990, Curtis Hanson film, and it stars James Spader and it stars Rob Lowe in roles that really don't match the aesthetic that we've been used to. We used to have Rob Lowe playing like the nice guy, or maybe like the overly confident, kind of self-absorbed guy, and James Spader always playing like the preppy douchebag, less than zero, pretty in pink. That's the guy that we kind of grew to know James Spader to be. But in this particular movie, they kind of switch, which is an interesting fact that we'll get to later. But I got to talk about Curtis Hanson really fast. I was a huge fan of his noir films of the 80s. You know, he wrote and co-directed Silent Partner. Then he did The Bedroom Window, which is a highly underrated film noir erotic thriller starring Steve Guttenberg of all people. I covered it on the Cult-Worthy. And this is one of those movies that I feel was kind of right in the brink before we got the full-blown erotic thrillers like Basic Instinct, but we were still kind of not far removed from the more hokey and cheesy thrillers of the 80s. So I guess we'll start this episode off by asking you, how do you feel about this movie, and how do you feel about 90s thrillers?
First, 90s thrillers are amazing because they're cheesy, they have a uniqueness to them, and they're just pure entertainment, but they do have an edge of some smart thrills to it. When it comes to Curtis Hanson, this one I think was his baseline, because what I really appreciate about Hanson is he gradually got better. He gradually listened to audiences, and he knew how to entertain by the time we got to his peak. And this one, even though I think you're going to might be a little surprised on my thoughts on this one, but this one I think was an okay thriller. It didn't blow me away. It wasn't horrible, but that's why I kind of think of this as a Curtis Hanson baseline, because it really has his potential on a lot of his shots. It has a lot of potential on a lot of things he integrates, but it is deeply flawed on how he executes a lot of the thrills that go into it. But you compare this to his first movie, to The River Wild, to LA Confidential, and you see a drastic improvement to his direction style. So there's a lot to be said on the appreciation of this movie when it comes to following the path and evolution of a director.
I'm actually not surprised at all that you feel that way, because that's exactly how I feel too. This is one of those films that when you're younger, you're fascinated by the wealth, the money, the excess, and the things that these guys have access to. And then you're fascinated by the things that Rob Lowe's character of Alex gets James Spader's character to do. But then when you grow up and you start appreciating film and structure and storytelling and things like that, you do see the flaws. It's one of the reasons why sometimes it's a bittersweet thing when we start reviewing these movies for this podcast, because there are some films that I'm like, oh my God, I remember this movie being so much better. But your tastes and your analysis grow as your film appreciation grows and as your attention for detail and structure grows. And I think you nailed it right on the head where this is baseline. But it's baseline that I think the characters and the people who play them don't necessarily do the story or the film justice. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, this was a script that was pitched to Rob Lowe from David Koepp. It was his first film that he sold solo on his own. And he's gone on to write and direct many great movies, mostly thrillers, but he also did Jurassic Park and, other things like that. So this was Rob Lowe's to handle. And originally Rob Lowe wanted to play the nice guy. Rob Lowe was especially designed to play the Michael character because that's kind of what he was doing with his career. He had just done the lousy Peter Bogdanovich movie Illegally Yours where he played the nice guy, and this was going to be the same thing. And Spader was kind of perfect to play the Alex character. Very manipulative, very good at getting people to do things they don't want to do. But it was Hanson's insistence that maybe they switch roles and that Rob Lowe use this opportunity to play the more dangerous character, the villain character, which is an interesting thing because throughout the 90s, that's kind of the character that he played from then on, being the bad guy in Wayne's World, being the bad guy in Tommy Boy, and so on and so forth. So I don't think it's the film as much that fails the director. It is the choices that everyone made, including himself, to have these people switch roles and maybe just fall a little bit too much victim to the late 80s, early 90s flair and style that films were really being recognized for.
Yeah, I can see that. And throughout this movie, I'm looking at the casting on it because James Spader is one of my all-time favorites of just pure on-screen likability.
Fantastic.
I mean, I think I started with James Spader in Mannequin as a kid, and he sold me from that movie. But this one, I almost wanted the reverse roles because we have these great-looking, the great-looking Rob Lowe, and you have those '90s stereotypes where you have the good-looking guy that always comes across as the asshole or the villain per se. This one, I think James Spader would have been challenged a little bit more to be that villain. I'm almost thinking of '96's Cable Guy, where you have that kind of that oddball almost as the villain, and having that really be explored through opposites where you're actually the analyst or the nerdy guy that the good guy wants to kind of follow. It would have added a little bit of uniqueness to this. And to me, that was the hardest part for me to follow, is following the stereotypical good looking guy that, and again, we'll get into the reviews of it, of our Siskel and Ebert stereotyping it as we want to be that guy. No, we don't know if we want to be that guy. We're looking up to his confidence, and that should be the primary aspect of a thriller. We follow the confidence, not the looks. And that's what's really missing from these characters that I'll get into in a little bit. But the characters we're not following because of their personality. We're following because of the confidence and the looks of how he presents himself in public. And to me, that's what takes this thriller back, is we're solely basing it on that.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, but I think it's deeper than that. I think you have to go back to when you say stereotypical, it's not just stereotypical of its time, it's stereotypical of this kind of story. Like I said in the intro, this is very Patricia Highsmith. This is very talented Mr. Ripley. It essentially created this archetype. Strangers on a Train is another example of that. And then we see this come out in 1990, and someone once said on my podcast, I can't remember who, that they had this theory that when any movie starts at the beginning of a decade, it takes a year or two to figure out if the movies are trying to be a reflection of the previous decade or a precursor to the films that are coming of the new decade. And this fills right in that gap because this is really trying to capture a lot of that Wall Street energy, right? The yuppie energy, the young people with money, they're just too good looking and they're too successful. And the things that they worry about, the normal person can't relate to. We can't relate to James Spader's magnificent townhouse. We can't relate to his golf clubs and all the shit that he's filling his apartment with. But that is where, if you follow this particular stereotype, this is almost like the middle step of your journey, like your fellowship of the ring, so to speak, because you used my next example. The cable guy definitely follows this same path of action, where you've got like a very milquetoast, just kind of boring, soft guy, the Matthew Broderick character, whose life and self-confidence and self-worth is challenged by someone who doesn't care about what society thinks about them and is a little bit of a rebel. They take it even further in Fight Club, where Tyler Durden is essentially the Alex character of this movie. I think that if you stacked all three of those on top of each other, they follow very much the same plot line and same structure of don't do what this guy says. Don't follow this guy's bullshit. He's going to take you deeper into trouble, and there's nothing ever for free. Now, it's a stereotype, but it's one that I respect and enjoy when the film's done right. I like Fight Club. I like The Cable Guy. I like this movie, but I will be the first to admit that it is heavily flawed, and that exactly what you're talking about, the characters are not emotionally connected enough to the audience for us to really care. So what do we focus on? We focus on the flair and the soundtrack and the good-looking people. So as eye candy and as a popcorn movie, it's fun, but it's very, very empty, like you were saying.
Well, that, and it is so structured to the point where we don't have any emotions and with these characters, like we just said. And even when we get into the reviews, the reviews made me angry to an extent, because I had to watch this again multiple times to see what I was missing. And I came to the realization I'm not missing anything, because there is no reaction to these characters. There's no emotion. The progression of these characters, I didn't care about these characters. It's all based on the situations that they do. It's all based on what the audience's reactions are going to be to seeing these two guys rob a convenience store, what these two guys how are these two guys are going to react when seeing a sex video in front of a party. They base our reactions on what they do, but not how they feel. There should have been a bigger reaction from James Spader in a lot of these events, and we don't get that. We base it off of the actions on screen. And I think that is where the performances are okay, but they don't really have anything to work with when it comes to the dialogue of it to really push these characters to the edge. It's almost like a light switch where we flip that light switch and things go south, and we still don't care at that point. And when we talk about Fight Club, I remember seeing this movie as a kid, and I don't remember it when you brought it to the table. And I was trying to think on how this movie ends. And I'm like, oh man, this would be a cool if this was him battling his inner demons. This is awesome if he's up against himself, and that's a twist. But that's not what we got. And it really fell into that structure of itself where it doesn't really go anywhere.
I mean, when I did see Fight Club in the theater for the first time, I literally thought it was just like the 90s Gen X kind of grungy version or remake of this film. It really does follow the same structures. But Spader's character, it's an interesting dynamic because the dude never is likable to begin with. But I think that's intentional because nobody in the movie likes him either. You know, like his fiance, this is a marriage strictly out of convenience for both of them. Like there's no passion between them. Then no one at work seems to like him, especially his receptionist, who I love, Kathleen Willoit, who's in a lot of genre movies. She's in Murphy's Law, she's in Roadhouse. She's perfect in this, and this is probably the most normal she's ever been on screen, but that's one of the things I noticed in my second watch in this last week of this movie is that nobody likes him at all. And his brother, Pismo, who I like that character, I think they could have gone a little bit deeper with the fact that he is a degenerate gambler and drug addict and pothead and loser. They don't make him seem pathetic enough to make that character really sympathetic to you. So when he is in danger, it's like, oh no, not Pismo, when it should have been a lot more gut-wrenching. I don't know. That's one of the things about this script that I'm enthralled when someone makes such glaring mistakes in their filmmaking where I feel like it's intentionally there. Where this isn't a character like Charlie Sheen in Wall Street, who we actually kind of like a little bit, and we don't want things to go wrong for him. We don't want him to make the bad decisions. But they make Michael so unlikable and so just low self-esteem, low confidence, low energy. Like, he's not manly the least bit. When Alex comes into his life and starts making him more aggressive and more manly and more alpha, it makes us like Alex, because it's like, yeah, someone knocks some sense into this pussy guy, right? That's where it doesn't make a lot of sense of like, okay, well, yeah, Alex is going to turn evil. We know that's coming. We know it's going to be the Glenn Close, oh shit, something's going to happen to this guy. But the turn isn't good enough because Michael isn't likable enough, which, again, that's where I get all Sherlock Holmesy. Is that intentional? Are we trying to like break the archetype of a movie like this where the guy we like turns bad and we follow his journey back to the good side? Or is this just an analogy for how immoral and emotionally empty the yuppie excess lifestyle of the 80s and 90s were? Because I'm starting to feel that way.
And I kind of am following that. But I kind of had a more neutral, because this character plays it neutral. It's a very linear performance where we get into the first hour and he's so quiet. It's almost like taking a introvert and assuming they're quiet because they think they're better than everybody else, because he doesn't really have a lot of dialogue here to really prove himself otherwise. So he plays it really safe. But here's what I will say: with the James Spader on-screen likability that we've seen over the years, I just don't know if we were ready for a character like this, because we're usually taking this role and making him have some kind of fault, some silliness maybe. There was some uniqueness to this character that really tried to
Yeah.
add that forced artificial likability to it. We don't get that with the Spader character here. We get kind of just a very neutral, and again, this is where it follows the structure where it doesn't give us enough information to tell us how we feel, and it doesn't allow us to really make an opinion of anything because we don't gain that information. And you brought up uh, Paulsmo, the brother character. And I think that's a great example of that, because this is how I think where we really have trouble is with the dialogue of giving us that information, because we have him with the Spader character discussing his faults, discussing his drug use, troubles with the law. They don't do anything with it. They just kind of leave it there, and we expect it to turn into something, but it's defining that character. Here's my faults, take it as you will, but it doesn't really generate anything from it. And from that one scene, we should have branches of what that's going to lead to, but it never goes far enough to tell us. And that's what I think my main issue is with this movie is, one, the characters don't show any progression or development or emotion in anything they do. And then they leave a lot of these lines just as almost filler, where we have nothing to base it off of, or we have nothing in the last act to really summarize this character. It's almost like screen filler to just elongate that scene to fill time.
Well, yes, because the film takes too much liberty with the third act of making it just a chase scene, right? It's making it a survival cat and mouse game now between Alex and Michael. And at this point, we have to believe that Michael has seen Alex do enough crazy shit that he can now essentially have a precognitive idea of what is going to come next. And I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. What I do buy is I do buy the fact that if we would have spent a little bit more time in the manipulative side of Alex and see how evil he really could be, then it would heighten the stakes and make us feel a little bit more intrigued about what's going to happen to him. Because it's almost as if they didn't want Rob Lowe to be too unlikable. They didn't want him to be too evil. They didn't want to take him too far, because then if he's the draw of the movie and he gives this villainous turn, well, what if that turns off the audience? Now, I got a little bit of a side story to that. In my research, I found out, and I didn't know this, that right in the middle of production of this movie is when the infamous sex tape of Rob Lowe came out. So here he is playing a villain essentially for like the first time and really getting into the role. And while they are in production, the news stories come out. It's like, okay, well, there's a sex tape of Rob Lowe out there with 2 women, and one of them's underage. And they kind of looked at things a little bit differently back then than now. Like that would be the end of his career. You're done, buried, R. Kelly gone, essentially, at this point. But back then, it was more of like a joke, right? It was more of like, this guy got caught with his dick out, blah, blah, blah. So it makes me want to speculate that they were going to have to do something to make his character less aggressive, less evil, and try and make him a little bit more likable so that bad press wouldn't affect this movie. And in my mind, it makes sense because the movie has a very different tone in that third act than what they build with his character in the first 2. Do you think there's some credit to that?
Yes and no, because one, they even mentioned it in one of our critics' reviews that he does that part so well that it could have been mistaken as research for this role.
Right.
And with him, and with him, with Rob Lowe researching stories on Ted Bundy, sociopaths. So there are elements here with Rob Lowe's portrayal where I think he went really all in with the sociopath piece of it, where it's not a Hollywood stereotypical kind of psychopath. It is, I want to call it safe, but I can see in my rewatches what he's trying to do with it. But you're absolutely right. There is a different tone to it. It's almost, depending on what scenes they shot first, though, is also something that I don't know.
Yeah.
But here's, even when we get to the end of it, is we still don't know if we like this guy or not, or we're still basing it off of his actions. So to me, I think it's hard to tell on that. I think that piece of it gave the movie some extra PR, and I think that really swayed a lot of the way this movie was seen. I think it was for Hollywood, the good time for the PR, but for audiences, I think that was the wrong time, given the subject matter, except for people that really wanted to see Rob Lowe have sex with women in this movie. But I don't know. I'm on the fence with that. It's hard for me to tell when it comes down to it, but I think he puts a lot of it, I'm gonna tread lightly here. I think he puts a lot of his personal life into a lot of the intimate scenes in this. And I can tell that was very natural for him when it comes to how he plays the Rico Suave, how he plays when it comes to sexual scenes in this movie. He plays it really cool compared to a lot of the other things he does in this movie. It's treated a little bit different. It's subtle, but you can tell there's a little bit of a difference there.
No, it's interesting that you say that because it's almost effortless, right? When he's playing those scenes and when he's playing the very sexual and charming character, it comes almost like there's no effort to it. However, when he starts pulling out these ridiculous accents and these characters that are meant to fool people because no one even knows what his real name is. He's got a story for everything. He's a sociopath. He's Tom Ripley. He is Tom Ripley. That's the whole point of this movie is this is a guy who can chameleon and just manipulate anybody because he's so charming. So people think he's a French architect. There's people who think that he is a nightclub owner, a guy who served in the army with his brother. Like he's got a story for everybody, and he's got it just all kind of like written in there. He believes his lies, which makes him the ultimate sociopath. But we like characters like that until they take the evil turn, going right back to Cable Guy, going right back to Tyler Durden. Like it's the same character progression. It's why those people end up on lunchboxes and t-shirts and posters. We kind of idolize dudes like this. So when we get to the reviews of our critics, one of them was very, very adamant that this movie was empty and hollow and these people were ugly and terrible, while the other one thought that it was more of a journey that we were supposed to take of someone getting out of their shell and just hero worshiping the wrong person for the wrong reasons. There's credit to both. I would say that before we jump into those reviews, my final analysis of this movie is I loved it when I was younger because it was dangerous, right? It was an adult film. It was a mature film. And Curtis Hanson was so good at making films for adults. I'd say him, Lawrence Kasdan, those guys in the 80s really knew how to make movies that adults could go see on their own. And it didn't even think about putting anything in for teenagers or kids at the time. Like, this is mommy and daddy's time alone to go watch a thriller. It does that very well. But it doesn't hold up when we think about all the cinema that's been made since then that fixes the issues that you and I see. So I'd say this is much more of a film that had the nostalgia goggles for me that I'll leave in that time. But on reanalysis, hey, I had fun with it, but it's really hard to forgive the obvious mistakes like the ones that you pointed out.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this was like a long episode of Red Shoe Diaries, right? Where you're a kid and you're fast forwarding to the sex scenes. So, but this is a complete adult movie of the early 90s, late 80s, where this is something mom and dad would go see because this is an adult movie. And because I saw it as kids too, I don't remember it as, like I said, as apparent as you do, but I remember watching this and just that. I would really watch the adult subject matter, but the characters I remember just didn't really interest me. I thought it was a little bit boring as a kid. But this one is a little bit taboo where your parents are having that special date night to go see a movie like this, and you want to see it because you usually see movies with your parents. So there's a lot to this movie that really plays it safe. It's simplistic dialogue, it's simplistic characters to an extent, which I'm going to argue with one of my critics here soon. But yeah, to me, it's just a kind of an average safe movie.
Isn't it funny that James Spader, after this came out, kind of just went hard in the paint throughout the rest of the 90s of doing films like this, movies like White Sands and Dream Lover, and Crash. He really followed that heightened sense of erotic thriller. And he's not that sexy of a dude, but it's that charm, it's that charisma that makes him feel dangerous yet attractive. And then Rob Lowe, after this, essentially went straight to comedies, doing SNL movies, doing doing Tommy Boy, doing Wayne's World, and then showing up as a young Robert Wagner in the Austin Powers sequel. That's kind of what we started seeing Rob Lowe doing. Yeah, he was in that remake of Salem's Lot, and he was in The Stand, but he wasn't necessarily a villain in either of those. He was really going back to being the charming hero. And then after Parks and Recreation, I don't think he'll ever get out of that particular character again. That's what people see him as. But I did like his dangerous side in this. I did. I wish we would have seen a lot more of it because we saw so much of Spader being dangerous in the 90s. It makes me wish that I could have seen more dangerous Rob Lowe.
Yeah, and we look at careers coming from this. I think if I were to take anything from this, and it was kind of a aha, no way moment when I rewatched it, was Christian Clemenson, who again played Michael's brother, James Spader's brother. They teamed up to do one of my favorite TV shows ever to air, which is Boston Legal.
Mhm.
And these two really grew a chemistry over the years. And if I were to take anything away from this movie, it's a fantastic origin story of these two fantastic actors.
Agreed. Yeah, I like that show too. All right, so let's hear what our critics had to say of it. Gene is the one that started this one off.
All the plot twists and turns in Bad Influence are predictable. What is not predictable is how ugly this film gets in terms of violence with beatings and stick-ups. There is a really trashy value system operating in this film, as the film sort of romances the very style it seems to deplore. The performers are okay. I'm just surprised that James Spader agreed to work in such a morally bankrupt and implausible story. He was very good in Less Than Zero, which was a film that I don't think worked all that well, but at least it was honest about its drug problem.
So I think that Gene's got some memory loss because he did not remember the fact that Spader's essentially the bad guy in Pretty in Pink, and he's definitely the bad guy in Less Than Zero. So to come into this saying that he's supposed to be this heroic character when really he's not a hero. He is a guy who's too afraid to be a hero, and that's why the twist from Alex comes in and makes a lot of sense, I think he misinterpreted the movie. What he didn't misinterpret, in my opinion, is the fact that it is predictable, is the fact that there is like an emptiness and hollowness to it. And then when there are scenes of violence, I feel like they're in the wrong moments of the movie to actually mean much. I think when they do the assault against Patterson, it happens too late. And when they do the stick up and the robbery, it happens too soon. Like the things that Alex gets Michael to do within this hour and a half of a movie don't really fit into the proper plot dynamics. Like it doesn't make sense why he would turn so early, but then not do the more brutal thing later on. So I agree with him on that point, but I also think that he didn't really understand the movie. What are your thoughts on that?
So I didn't watch the review until I rewatched this movie, and it was so average for me that when the review came up, I was like, all right, so don't know what they're going to give it, but if it's 2 thumbs down, they're going to have some great reasons for it.
Right.
Gene, even though I would have given it a thumbs down, his review pissed me off because it literally feels like he didn't watch the movie, period.
That's what I think too.
Like, I had to rewatch the review because there is nothing that he verbalizes that I saw in this movie except for being predictable, because he talks about a lot of the James Spader character, which I couldn't see. And before you play another clip, I'll stop myself because there's probably a lot more that's going to come from this.
Well, yeah, before we even play the next clip, I was amazed how much debate there was of this film. Like, we've seen some hot debates with them before. This is one of the lengthiest debates I've seen with them for a while. And it's interesting that Roger is such a defender of this movie. And like you said, that Gene feels almost like he is walking into his book report and not read the book. So let's see what this rest of this interview looks like.
Movie is about behavior. It is about a weak man who is attracted to a strong man who is a very dangerous, violent, and evil man.
I could figure that out.
It's the same story. The screenplay is written by a man named James Capp, who wrote a movie last year that I didn't like at all called Apartment Zero, but it's the same story. The weak man who has the strong man come into his life, and he really admires everything about him, except what he doesn't realize is the guy is some kind of a sociopath. Now,
I think
that's what this movie is about. It's about how the guy...
I knew that. What's the point?
Well, I don't understand what you mean by bad values. James Spader doesn't have bad values in this movie.
I would think that there was certain behavior here. I'm talking about the value system of the movie, which I think, rather than being a cautionary tale or some tough stance on the Rob Lowe character, really is, in its own way, embracing.
So I like where Roger's going with it. He definitely saw the movie. I feel like he might have seen it twice. He's got a lot of knowledge about what he's talking about, except that he mispronounced the screenwriter's name. It's David Koepp, not James Koepp. But I like the fact that he said this movie is about behavior, because at the core, that really is what it's about. It's called Bad Influence. But when he says that James Spader is not like a morally reprehensible man, yes, he is. That's the whole point of the movie, is that all of the things that Alex gets him to do, they're all things that he desperately wanted to do anyway. He just didn't have the balls to do it without this guy leading him in the way. I think that's where Roger misses the point, is that James Spader is morally compromised. Because you can't just turn a person who's not morally compromised as quickly as Alex does. Alex recognizes that he is, as he's probably done to other dudes in the past. And that's the point of the movie. So I think they both missed the point, in my opinion.
Gene didn't watch it, and Roger read the synopsis. That's kind of where it boils down to, because both of them are wrong. The review for both of them lies in the middle here, because this isn't a great character study. The premise is the interesting thing. The premise is the study. This movie doesn't do anything with the premise. In no way, by the end of the movie, I should take something away from these characters. I took nothing away from these characters. Yes, it's weak and the strong. It's idolizing the strong. Give me a better point than that. That is nothing in a 2-hour long movie. You have to add some substance to that. So just by And even Gene, in fairness, does call him out on that. What is the point? Is just reiterating the most simplistic piece of this movie. We get the theme of it, but there is no way that this would be a character study. This would be bottom of the barrel for me on a character study, because there's no emotion, like we talked about, to any of these characters to care. I was not interested by the time the credits rolled. I was not interested on finding out anything more about these characters because I sat for 2 hours and learned nothing.
Well, I feel like the person that we were supposed to learn more about is Alex's character because, like I said, there is a tonal jump that doesn't make any sense. After he sells all of Michael's stuff and Michael essentially tells him to get out, which if this was the cable guy, it's the moment where Matthew Broderick realizes that Jim Carrey set him up with a hooker, kicks him out, and then Jim Carrey brings his world down. That's that moment. But how he gets back at Michael for that, spoilers, is he murders somebody to frame Michael for it. A person that both he and Michael were physically and emotionally attracted to, so we think. But that step from where the last step was in the progression of Alex's evil is so ridiculous. You go from selling a dude's stuff to murdering a woman that knows you and your social circle to blame this guy on it. And now you're going to just keep ruining his life with this setup of, okay, he's going to get caught. What am I going to do to make this guy bury a body, get rid of the evidence? And I'm going to just keep twisting the knife in him until he finally cracks. There's no reward in it for Alex. It makes no sense. Even if he is a sociopath or a psychopath, the whole idea is like, okay, well, now someone's dead. If I'm going to set this guy up, the smart move is for me to leave and never come back. I don't buy the progression of Alex's full turn into evil because they do it too quickly. They don't give us enough time of why or what is going to drive him to that point. And that's what takes me to my second point. Curtis Hanson wrote but did not fully direct The Silent Partner. He got to direct some more heavy scenes that the original director didn't want to do. So what I feel like he really desperately wanted to make his own version of The Silent Partner, and he wanted a villain as terrifying and as treacherous as Christopher Plummer's character in that movie. And that's what he does with Rob Lowe in that second and third act, where the dude will hang around and watch the body get uncovered. The dude will continue to push the buttons. But the difference between those two movies is that Christopher Plummer's character is a maniac from the very beginning. And this guy comes in with this smooth act and these accents and this, let's go have fun, let's go knock off a liquor store, let's build a man out of you, and then turns to this full-blown, like I said, Bunny Boiler, Glenn Close type character. But it doesn't make sense to me. If there was a romantic connection between the two of them, like if there was some kind of homoerotic story between the two of them, I'd like it better because it makes sense then. It doesn't make sense to me that Rob Lowe would make that much of a turn because it just doesn't make the story work, and it's kind of a cheap shot.
Yeah, and there is a scene in there where they kind of almost hint at a little homosexuality to it, but they never they never explore it further. But I think you nailed it when it comes to the pivotal scene of selling the stuff versus killing someone, because that was a light switch of things just going kind of bonkers. And that's where I would really disagree with Roger on a character study, because these actions, like you said, happen too quick. It's not a character study. It's a complete temper tantrum to the extreme. So it doesn't really tell us anything other than, okay, this guy, is he a sociopath or is he a psychopath or is he a mix of both? We have these questions on this character that never go answered. And that is not a character study. That is just throwing darts at the dartboard, hoping that it's just there for entertainment. So that is, again, like I said at the beginning, my biggest problem with this movie. And even more so, my problem with these two reviews is that both of them, this is the first time on this show, I think, that I say they both get it wrong, even though it's a thumbs up, thumbs down, because there's not enough detail in either of their reviews to really justify their review, whether they liked it or they disliked it. Gene goes on to say it's dark, it glorifies drugs and sex, which I don't get, because even during the killing scene, we don't see anything. This movie, to me, isn't violent to any extent. And this is the guy that gave thumbs up to Natural Born Killers. So I don't know where he's going with this, because it doesn't glorify drugs or alcohol. Because here's what I will give the film credit, is that there is a result to the action. There is a consequence to the action. James Spader pays for a lot of the stuff that he does. Losing his marriage that he didn't want in the first place, okay, but it's still an action. There's something bad that happens with everything that he does with drugs or alcohol. The movie's not telling us if we do coke, if we drink, if we get drunk every night, that we're going to end up with this beautiful woman in our bedroom. So that's not what this movie is saying. So, and that's where Gene really kind of gets it a little bit more wrong than Roger, in my opinion.
Right, and there is no happy ending for James Spader. Yeah, they probably got him off the hook with murder from the cool little trick they do at the end. Like I said, probably the best part of this movie is the collaboration between the loser brother Pismo and Michael teaming up to take Alex down. I loved all of that stuff, but James Spader's not walking off into the sunset. He still has to answer for the bank robbery, the donut shop robbery and the convenience store robbery. He has to answer for all those things that he did. His probably only thing that's any good for him is he's not going to go away from murder, but that's pretty much it. But they continue, man. They kept on going with this.
This basically is a male version of Looking for Mr. Goodbar, in which he finds somebody who's going to turn his life around, and for a while he goes along with that, and he finds out that through his own terrible drinking and drug problem, he is led by this other guy down the garden path to doing all kinds of things that he wouldn't have ordinarily done by himself. It's about that. It doesn't endorse it. It doesn't cheer it on. It's the subject matter of the film.
I'm just saying that the way it's told, and what upset me was that it seemed to be saying on one thing, the guy shouldn't be doing what Lowe is saying, but at the same time, the film really loves what Lowe is doing.
Did you find this as an interesting character study?
Oh, absolutely not.
The relationship between these two guys? Not at all?
Not in the slightest way. And the reason is, I think that Spader has a real intelligence on the camera, and that he would see where Lowe was taking him.
The character that he plays doesn't see until it's too late. That's what the movie is about.
And I'm saying it isn't convincingly told because Lowe is so obviously a slime bucket that you can tell the character is.
We disagree.
I haven't heard them go at it like that in a while, and over such a mediocre film.
Yeah, and if you look at even Ebert's review to it, I mean, he doesn't rave about it. He gave it 3 stars in his written review. And a lot of the points that he's making on the character study, he does touch on, but the review is really repetitive when it comes to kind of what I talked about, reading the synopsis, because it's almost like 1,000 words of just that. And I think he was really trying to convince a reason to really like this movie. And I think this is one of those Ebert movies that really he saw something in the character that he can relate to. And people that like this movie might see something that I don't, because they can relate to how this character feels. Again, I don't know that many people in that kind of work position or that kind of moral decision of marrying a beautiful woman because of money. I'll never be put in that position. But you know what? Some people might. But there is a relatability to it that he saw that I will never see, no matter how many times I see this movie. But he is going to defend this movie to the full extent. And I think what really irked Ebert is the review that Gene gave when it comes to some very vague points that really don't make sense.
I'll tell you what I think. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second. I think that David Koepp probably wrote a very, very good, tight script that probably had a lot of nuance to these characters that would have made it work if it wasn't so heavily stylized by Curtis Hanson. I feel like this was a film, and like you said, it's his baseline, but he's trying to impress you, but this isn't a story that is meant to be impressive. If this would have been a lot more lower key, less hyper stylized 80s, 90s style, with the really just hot lights and the glamorous looks and the sculpted hair, I feel like this would have played a lot better if it had been done a little bit more on the cheap, on the narrow path of like, let's just tell the story. Let's not try to be too glamorous with it. Let's not have all these needle drops when they're robbing the convenience store, right? That's how I kind of feel. I feel that this was a film that was misunderstood by its director. Therefore, its cast did not pay the true respect and intention that the writer really did with these characters. Because I feel there's a good script in there. I feel there's a good script in this movie. I feel that everything that was built on top of it is what's lacking.
Yeah, there are times in this movie, and I think this one fell victim to a lot of you can't say that, you can't do that. Audiences are going to like that.
Right.
Because there's a scene that felt like it should have gone further. I talk about the Lowe and the Spader character really having an intimate conversation, and it feels like that should have turned into something more. It felt like there was some male love there, that we're missing dialogue, and I feel like that would have been an interesting concept. And it felt like a lot of times during this movie it went through the cutting board, and studios thought and decided for the audience on what we want to see. I think the main problem with this film is, you're absolutely right. You can tell with a new director, they stick to a style and they shoot what looks good on screen, and they're hoping that the visuals on screen will entertain. We see that a lot with new directors in the 80s. But I think what really falls flat with this movie is it doesn't go far enough. I think the dialogue doesn't go far enough. I think what we see doesn't go far enough. This movie was designed for mom and dad date night. This was designed for kind of a mild thrill, but it doesn't really have the thrill factor because it's nothing to support it. It's a safe script. And I think when it comes down to it, if we were to look at the original draft, I will put money on it that this was 100% something a lot more risque for the early 90s.
I agree. If you think about it, like the safeness of movies that were meant to be dangerous back in the late 80s, early 90s is so apparent when you watch them now. This film, perfect example. Sleeping with the Enemy, perfect example. Hand That Rocks the Cradle. These were movies that when we came up, like, oh my God, have you heard about this movie? It's so intense. It's this and that. And then we watch it now and it's just like the holes are just all over the place. You see right through them because we've seen enough thrillers now that we're smart enough not to make the mistakes that films like this did and aren't afraid to go that extra distance. That's why Basic Instinct was such a huge hit. It went places with its suspense, with its thriller, and with its eroticism that films like this weren't ready to go yet. And I think that is the film that really turned the tables on what is an adult suspense film look like? What does an erotic thriller, crime thriller look like after a movie like that changes the industry?
Yeah, when you make comparisons like that, and they're great comparisons, when you go all in on a script and you go all in with nobody touching it and you take some risks, you're going to win more often than not. I think there's only like one movie that I will never advertise or come off my lips that I've seen that went all in that was absolutely horrible. But more often than not, you're going to win the audience over because, again, it's something they don't see. It's something that you won't see in the early 90s. The only thing that's holding these creators back are going to be the ones with moral instinct behind the studio desk saying, no, you can't do that. But this is something where when you put it to a screen, it might not be successful now, but that's when you start to get cult status because more and more words get out on the creativity of the script, the freedom of the writer. There is rarity to these screenplays that when they go all in, you can't really be disappointed because there's a level of respect that you have for these creators of going all in and not making another generic piece of crap that you're going to forget a week down the road. And this is one of those movies that doesn't fall drastically to the complete piece of crap, but it is almost a forgettable movie to an extent because there's nothing that entices me to hang on to it.
I don't think this film's an underrated classic. That's why no one talks about it, right? It's perfect for this show, but it's never made the other show because it's just not special enough. It's not dangerous enough, and it's not different enough to build that cult status. Was it a fine video rental back in the day? Yeah. Was it a good Friday night for mom and dad to go see? Yeah. But no one's talking about it. And when I had it on Twitter a couple weeks ago, No one like, oh, I love that movie. No one had anything great to say about it. But I think the whole point of this episode was the discourse between the two of them, the debate, the fact that Roger defended it so much when we've seen him just literally lay down the sword for films that he should have been fighting for. And this is the one that he is like, I'm dying on this hill. I still don't get it. But anyway, now it's time for the ratings. So for my critic, Mr. Gene Siskel, solid F. It's one of the worst critiques I've seen him do. It's definitely the worst next to the Frighteners we've done on this show so far. Like, there was so little attention to detail. It really felt like he didn't watch the movie, or maybe he just glanced up from his newspaper while he was watching it, or his goobers, whatever he was doing. Like, it just felt like he was very ill prepared for this conversation. So when he gets defensive, he's almost burying himself deeper in the hole because Roger came to play and he just kept going over the same points over and over again just for the sake of not being the guy who didn't get the last word in.
Your best rating so far. Totally agree. Now, with Roger, this one was hard for me because I cannot fault a critic for giving his interpretation on the characters, how he felt, how he related to it. What I will give him credit to is that he fought for his interpretation, even though I did feel like there wasn't enough detail to it. There wasn't enough other than kind of what he spoke to on the strong versus the weak over and over again till Gene had to cut him off saying, what's the point? I don't think he gave a lot of detail to that. But I will give him credit to sticking to his guns on his interpretation of the character. So I'm not going to take points away for that. So I'll give him a 2 just because he did fight for his feelings of the interpretation of the characters. But I think it was still lackluster when it comes to detail, when it comes to why he felt these characters the way he did. So I think it was an average review. But I do think the banter between the both of them was probably a solid 3 stars, 3.5 maybe.
It's one of the most entertaining debates I've seen them have, but it was one of those things where I was entertained by it, but at the same time I feel like I got nothing out of it because neither of them came to any real solid conclusions at the end of the day. Neither of them swayed my opinion of this film one way or another, where sometimes, and it's usually Roger, who brings some kind of insightfulness to the movie that I didn't catch before. And you and I are pretty good at catching those things on our own and maybe bringing some insight to our audience that Siskel and Ebert didn't bring to theirs. I think that's good on us. We've gotten some compliments on that. But if you have a debate that's intense and that long, I would hope that you would sway my opinion one way or another. And neither of them did. I still feel like this movie is like a solid C+. Like, it's a middle tier movie for me. Will I watch it again? Yeah, if it's on, but it's nothing that's going to be on my shelf. Like I said, I had to rent it. And if I don't love a movie, it doesn't go on my shelf.
100%. And watching this review, I really just wanted to get in between these two and just say you're both wrong.
You're both wrong.
There has to be there's a review somewhere in the middle here, and you're both getting it wrong. And to your point, if it's on TV, I'll watch it. If I had a choice between watching Mannequin and this one, just at a pure entertainment value, I'll watch Mannequin because it makes me feel happy. This one, I took more feels from the characters than I did a guy falling in love with a mannequin than I did with this one.
Well, I will give this movie credit for is it put me back on a James Spader kick where I wanted to go back and watch some old James Spader movies I hadn't seen for a while. And it made me watch Tough Turf, which I forgot how fucking awesome Tough Turf is. I mean, it's an 80s movie through and through. It might be like the most 80s movie of all 80s movies, but that's a James Spader that I really like. So if I'm picking an 80s James Spader movie where he's the main guy, it's Tough Turf.
Great pick. 100% agree with that one. So anything in the 80s, it's hard to say you don't like a James Spader movie, but this one was just okay. But a lot of James Spader he's one of those on-screen presence that you just watch just to enjoy James Spader. And this one, it just wasn't really likable.
Okay, so next week, Justin is bringing to the show a movie that I've only seen once and hated, but that was like 15 years ago. So I'm going to have to watch it again, and who knows, he might have changed my mind. We're not going to talk about it until the day of recording, but Justin's bringing Great Balls of Fire with Dennis Quaid and Winona Ryder. And all I can say is I really, really, really hope that I was wrong about this movie, because this is the first movie on your list that I am legit dreading. And I told you that when you put it on the list months ago. I was like, God damn it, he's putting Great Balls of Fire on there. So let's see what happens.
Hey, I didn't say if I liked it or not. It could be just based on the review, so you don't know till next week.
That is true, but we both seem to have like a running track record of like, okay, I kind of like this movie, otherwise I wouldn't put it on there. Anyways, everyone, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Got a big announcement. You'll probably hear the promos before this episode comes out, but this show is now a part of the Deluxe Edition Network, or the Den. It's the network that my previous show, The MILF and Me, belonged to. So once we're on there, the links will be on my website. The bumpers will be on the episodes. Check out the shows on there. There's some great movie shows. There's some great shows about beers. It's a great network that has a lot of different varieties of podcasts on there, and we're really happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, I've heard nothing but great things for this network, so happy to be part of it, and I'm glad this show is part of it, so it's an exciting time.
Absolutely. So like I said, everyone, in the past, please like, review, rate, subscribe to us on YouTube. You can find it on your favorite podcasting platforms, or you can find all the links on my website, thecoltworthy.com. You can find all of Justin's links on
at themoviewire.com, and you can follow me on any of the socials at MovieWire Show.
And if you think of a film that we haven't talked about that Siskel and Ebert reviewed, let us know on the socials and we'll get it on the list. So far, we got one person reaching out with Godzilla 1985. Excited for that one. Justin, it was a pleasure. I will see you next week.